Hello, everyone. Today, I'm super excited to welcome back Sandy Saburn from Gifted Travel Network. Sandy, it's so good to see you.
It's so good to be here, Whitney.
So, first, I guess I'm curious to know since we had you on last time, and I think you should know it was a little over a year ago, we recorded our Tech Stack podcast, and
Has
it
it been
is
a year?
yeah, it was last August.
Mhm.
And it is hands down still one of the most listened to episodes of all time.
Ho I am honored. I am honored. I think that we probably need to revisit that conversation again. There's so much going on in the tech world of
I
travel.
agree. I agree. Let's get that one on the calendar because I think that some of my answers might be different than what we said a year ago.
I think some of mine might be too.
Amazing. I love that. Okay, so we'll do that next. But for today, we're going to talk about asking the right questions to best serve our client. And I love just the general premise of this topic because I feel like I'm always leading with questions. On the podcast, I'm coming with questions. With clients, I'm coming with questions. This is all just even with my business. I never sit down looking at my business without just asking questions of like, how can this be improved? Where can we dig deeper here? What can I learn over here? I'm just always all with the questions. So I'm curious to know first, before we dive into the topic, how did this come to be a topic that was top of mind or just an interesting conversation starter in your mind? Are you seeing something with your advisors at GTN? Are you seeing and hearing anything in the industry? Like, how did this come to be a topic in your mind?
So I love that we're starting this conversation with you asking me a question. It's very appropriate.
A question about the question.
A question about the question. So the way this came about, I too have always been one of those people who loves to ask question. Yeah, the I've always been one of those people that's just insanely curious. And if I drive by a big tractor trailer on the interstate and it's got this big piece of equipment on there, I wanna know, what is that for? Why? Why is that there?
Where's it
What is that
going?
doing? Where is it going? What does it do? How does that work? What does and I'm just that's just the way I've always been. And so when it comes to the travel industry, one of the things that I noticed in working with a lot of travel advisors is that they don't ask as many questions and they don't ask very open-ended questions. And so I've always been an advocate of doing that. But the I sort of recently revisited this topic because I was doing a workshop on how to close more sales. And one of the things that I talked a good bit about was the reason that a lot of people struggle to get clients to book with them is because they've not done enough to help the client know why they should book with them, and they haven't done enough to help build a rapport with the client. And a lot of times, building rapport comes from asking questions of the client,
Mhm.
which doesn't necessarily seem intuitive, but there's a lot of value that you can demonstrate just by the questions that you're asking.
100%. Yes. Okay. So when you say that you're seeing advisors who are not asking enough questions or they're not asking open ended questions, how are you observing this currently?
So some of this has been just through conversations with people, both with talking to just people who've reached out to me or like, I'm struggling to build my business. I've sent out 15 quotes and I'm not getting any bookings or just having even in the conversation recently with our top producers club, we got onto this subject. I got on the subject with one of our, multi-million dollar advisors and they were talking about the process that they were going through and the questions that they asked clients, and we were just sort of revisiting that topic. And I think that there's a lot of people out there in the industry who are building their businesses who are maybe not being guided to develop the right practices in the process early on. because they're sort of defaulting to a travel agent, let's get this booked model rather than a travel advisor. Let me help you create and craft the very best vacation possible for your vacation budget or for your travel budget. And what they're jumping to is asking too many. Where do you want to go? When do you want to go?
Mhm,
How many
mhm,
people are going? And those they're just jumping to those questions that help get them booked rather
mhm.
than getting to know the client. And actually this came up recently with somebody who was saying that they were struggling with how to stay connected with their client between the time the trip was booked and the time was traveled, or how what kind of gift to give a client before they travel or after they come back from travel because they wanted to do that. If you don't know enough about the client, those are all
It's a
areas
hard.
you're going to struggle. It's
Yeah.
hard.
This is this is really interesting. So, I recently had an experience that felt frustrating at the beginning, and then it kind of, like, came back around to remind me why I do what I do, which is always setting up a call and which is charging a fee. So,
Mhm.
earlier in the summer, I think in May or June, someone reached out. They'd been referred by another really great client, and they wanted to go to Wimbledon.
Mm,
And I was really and this other client who referred them had gone to the French Open. So it was like a tennis
okay.
referral, which is exciting. But I've never booked Wimbledon before. And so instead of because that's how she led and because I knew that that's what she was interested in, instead of setting up a call and having a discovery call, usually I try to go into a discovery call knowing what an estimated budget is going to be and able to describe the experience. And so I didn't go through my typical process for this inquiry because I don't know the first thing about Wimbledon. I don't know what cost projections we need to be prepared for. I don't know how the tickets work. There's a few different providers and suppliers that we can work with to do this. So just for all of these reasons, I kept it over email for a while and I found the partner that I wanted to work with. I got like a presentation and quotes and kind of getting a sense of how this works. And I learned all about debenture seating and center court and how I learned all the things that I needed to
All
know
the
about
things.
Wimbledon. And so now I know. But I was sending all this information to her by email saying, okay, here's the average cost. The cost depends upon the day that you want to attend. So picking the day and knowing how many tickets and all these things. So we get all the way to the point where she's like, okay, I'd like to go. I'd like to go on this day. This is the ticket that I'm looking for. And I said, why don't we set up a call to now that we've kind of got Wimbledon under wraps, we understand the cost. You have decided on how you'd like to move forward. Why don't we set up a call to now discuss the rest of your trip?
Mhm.
Right? Because
Right.
we will now build a trip around this. And then as I was sending her my calendar link, I looked back in our email thread and I realized she never filled out a form. She hadn't been on my website. I hadn't shared with her my about working with us link that I always do for new clients, which
Right.
means that she doesn't know that I charge a fee or that I need to assume that she doesn't know.
Right.
Well, we're 2 months in by this point.
Wow.
Of, like, gathering Wimbledon information, because then there was a hot second where she was also like, "Maybe we'll do the British Open?" Yeah, the golf tournament, British Open,
Mhm.
at the same time
Right.
because it's in Ireland and the dates, like, coincide, so then that's why it took 2 months because now we were talking about 2 events. And so I sent her my email and I said, "Here's the link about working with me, just so you know what to expect. Here is my calendar link for this scope of work. Here's my fee."
That you've already done.
That I will charge once we kind of get into the more custom itinerary design, but I've already done a lot of work
Right.
without charging anything, right?
Right.
And I will agree that from her perspective, this might feel like a whoa, where did this come from? Because we're already this far in. But from
Right.
my perspective, I was like, listen, I couldn't have charged this fee 2 months ago because I didn't know the first thing about Wimbledon.
Mhm.
Now, the client doesn't know that. That's not their fault. But as a business owner, I probably need to think about this a little bit differently next time.
Right.
There's a point to this story if you'll stick with me. So
Got
she doesn't write back. I follow up with her and she just writes back very shortly, like, quite frankly, we've never paid a travel agent a fee before, and I don't know why we would now. I don't see the value.
Mm.
My first very frustrated thought was, well, good luck booking Wimbledon by yourself. Because you actually can't. But that's not, I didn't say that. And that's not a very good thought. My stomach kind of sank a little bit because I was like, I have now put myself in a position in which I feel like I have to prove myself.
Mhm.
And I am 8 years into running a really solid business. I am just not like interested in this right now. If you feel that the last 2 months of correspondence, of gathering all the information that I provided for you is not valuable to you, then do I need to continue to prove that it is? So
Exactly.
I was very, very frustrated by this. And part of me just kind of wanted to like leave it and let it die. But I didn't. I just wrote back and I can't remember what I said specifically, but I was basically just like, let's get on a call and we can discuss more. I'm happy to talk with you more about this and whatever. And so she did schedule a call. And I went into that call and I really had to like release the brain fog of the frustration of this situation. And
Right.
I just went into this conversation thinking, I'm just going to ask questions and get to know this client and provide the expertise that I'm able to provide.
Right.
That's all I'm going to do. I'm not preparing my script on why I charge fees and what you get for that fee. I'm not coming into this with an air of I need to convince you to work with me. I am just going to do what I do, which is ask questions and get to know people. And if you really decide that you don't want to charge a fee, then we can part ways and that's okay. And so I just ask questions. And I got to know her and I got to know her partner. And I shared a lot of ideas that they hadn't previously thought of as to like how to approach the rest of their trip. We kind of high level sketched out a plan that they were now both very excited about. When coming onto the call, they were not, because come to find out, is not excited by Wimbledon whatsoever.
Ah.
And she is, but we discovered this on the call. And so then I built a whole plan based on his interests. I was like, while she's at Wimbledon, I think we could do X, Y, and Z with you. And he was like, you could just feel his energy coming over the
Mm.
phone. Now he's excited when he wasn't previously. And by the end, she was just like, this has been so helpful. This has been so valuable. And she didn't say, I'm happy to pay the fee, but basically she said, I'm happy to pay the fee. Like, how do we move forward? And I'm now planning this trip for her.
That's
And
awesome.
so I'm taking like a really long time to tell you the story that getting to know someone and simply asking questions is what led them to trusting me and happily paying a fee, as opposed to my initial gut reaction of thinking, I now have to go convince somebody and prove my worth.
Right.
And actually, it wasn't that at all.
And so many people would have responded to that email that they sent and said, "Fine. I don't work with me then. I don't care." But you took a step forward and got curious about them and said, "Let's hop on a call." And I still don't understand how so many travel advisors and people in other industries too feel like they can operate their business purely on text and email. Because you did give a lot of value to that client through your email exchange, but it
Uh-huh.
wasn't until you really got on that call and
Yes.
really got to talking to one another that you really built some
Yes.
sort of a connection.
She had no connection to me over email, even though I had provided a tremendous amount of information that I was gathering and guiding her on how to move forward with Wimbledon. It's incredible to think back that of all of the research I did, all the correspondence with suppliers, all the questions I was asking of the suppliers on her behalf to learn about how we go about this, and then providing all of that in a very concise, straightforward, easy to understand way for her. She didn't she appreciated it. She was happy to have the information. She was ready to book it, but she did not see it as an add value. She did not see it as expertise. She did not see it in any way, shape, or form that merited charging a fee above and beyond the booking itself.
Mm. And I think part of that, and this is no scientific, I cannot cite any kind of scientific source. This is just Sandy's thoughts on why this might be. But when you read information that's sent to you via email, or even if you put it in a very pretty presentation format, it's almost like reading Google search results. But when you talk to somebody and you have a conversation with them, then it's moves into the realm of, I have an advocate and this person is going to help me, and I have a resource in this person, because not whether or not you know all the answers, which nobody does, but whether or not you know the answers, you know how to get the answers because you've demonstrated
Yes.
that.
Yes. And I
Maybe
think,
that's the difference.
well, and I think when you ask them questions, I think sometimes when we talk about displaying your expertise and always kind of being one step ahead of the client, there's often this like misconception that we have to have all the answers or we have to have as many answers as possible so that we can show up and be like this open textbook, this open, encyclopedia of the world, able to answer any question that you have. And I think that the topic that you brought up today is so it's the perfect flip in perspective that actually being an expert is often knowing what questions to ask the client. And it's not about giving some sort of like presentation at all about
Mhm.
what you know about that destination or what you know about travel planning in general. It's actually knowing how to show up and what to ask.
Right. How to be a problem solver and a resource and a guide and a connection to other ways. I mean, because there's not that many people who can sell Wimbledon tickets, but you tapped into a resource that allowed you to learn about that and how it happens. So you didn't have to know exactly, oh, if you sit here, it's this amount. And if you have these seats, I don't know anything about Wimbledon either. So I don't know how it works. But I think that you're right that you're not chat GPT in human form. And that's not actually what they're looking for. They can go online and search for anything. What they're looking for is for somebody that they can make a connection with who is going to help them. Now, that's not what everybody's looking for because there are those people out there who've done all their research and all they're looking for is the cheapest price. But we all know, hopefully everybody knows at this point, those are not your clients. That's not
Right.
your people. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
that's not who you need to be targeting.
So, talk to me a little bit more about asking the right questions. So, when you think about asking the right questions, I think devil's advocate here or somebody who wants to push back a little bit is be like, well, what are the right questions? How do we know what the right questions are? Like, okay, I'm here. I'm going to ask questions, but what are the right questions?
What
So, how
questions
do
do I
we,
ask?
yeah, walk us through like how your perspective on what are the right questions to ask, and are we asking the client? Are we asking suppliers? Like, where? Tell me where you're going with this because I feel like I'm going in a different way, which could be interesting.
That could be interesting, yeah. So there are definitely questions you need to ask suppliers, but I think, especially if you're working with a DMC, if you're working with a DMC who specializes in, let's say you're working with a DMC for England
Mhm.
or and the UK in general, since you might be doing golf and tennis, then obviously you're going to need to ask questions of them. But to be most effective in asking questions of them, you need to talk to the client first, ideally, or have some idea of what it is they're looking for. Case in point, you didn't know until you got on this call that the partner was really not interested in Wimbledon and was
Right.
really probably dreading not only the idea of I've got to sit through this boring sport because I'm not interested in it, and it's probably going to cost me a lot of money to be there because it
Exactly.
is.
A really expensive day to do something he had no interest in doing. Yeah.
Yes. And so the idea of being able to come up with something for the partner to do while the other person is at Wimbledon living their best life is super important. So I think one of the very first questions that I like to ask people, and you're not asking this question to second guess them. So don't think of it that way. Is so if you and I were having a conversation, Whitney, and you reached out to me, and we'll just pick a different topic, and let's say that you wanted to go to Alaska, you've never been. Alaska's hot right now. So the first question that I would want to know is why? What is it about Alaska that's intriguing to you? What is it about Alaska? Why Alaska? Why this particular thing? So the same thing with Wimbledon. Why Wimbledon? What is it about it? Is this person a tennis? Have they played tennis their entire lives? Have they followed tennis their entire lives? But the more you know about the client and what's driving their passion, then the better you are able to figure out something, craft a vacation that will wow them. And that's the other reason to have a video call, I think, is so that you can see their responses. You can see what lights them up. You can see where they get excited and where they get animated and what's what they're talking about. And that just helps because so much of communication is nonverbal. So you're
Yes.
getting the full package. You're not getting that if you just talk to them on the phone, which I take it most people don't really even do that anymore, talk to people on the phone. And if you're communicating with them via email, you're not getting any of that. And so
Mhm.
that becomes more of a challenge. So as for the right question to ask, I think the first one is why. And to get a sense of what it is that makes them excited about this, why they pick this, why now even? To Is it because, we had a health scare and we realized time is short, or we have a very detailed list and this year we're doing this and this year we're doing that and next year we're doing that. That's an exciting thing for a travel advisor to learn about a
Mhm.
prospective client is, "Ooh, look at all these things I've got mapped out that I can help them with." So that's where I would start is the question of why.
So I'm gonna ask you what comes next, and then I'm gonna come back to what happens when sometimes we ask why. It doesn't always lead to the best answers.
That that's true, and sometimes you have to keep digging for information, but after you ask why and you get a sense of this is what we're going for and this is what we want to do, this is why we want to do it. I think the other thing, and it doesn't necessarily flow exactly in this way, but the other thing you need to get a sense for is some other trips that they've done that they loved or their expectations maybe for this trip. Because at a to boil it down to a very basic level, you need to know, are these like luxury clients and the most important to them thing to them is time and to be taken care of, and so that things are planned smoothly, that somebody picks them up at the hotel, somebody drives them here, somebody takes them there, and everything is taken care of, or are they more adventurous? So you've got to ask questions that lead to those answers, and sometimes saying, tell me about we've never worked together before, so just tell me about a trip that you've done in the last 5
I love
years
that.
that's been
Mhm.
amazing, and what
Mhm.
made it amazing, and
Mhm.
hear them talk
Mhm.
about that.
I specifically like that question. I until recently I've had that question on my new inquiry form.
Mhm.
And thanks to a lot of really smart people that I've had on the podcast, primarily Jeremy Sulik,
Mm.
who just kind of brought like just some like a new perspective of make the inquiry form shorter and easier. And I thought that is the first question. That is a really good question. I still stand by asking that question,
Mhm.
but I think it would be better served in conversation during a discovery call instead of on a new inquiry form. Because
Mhm.
making someone type out an answer about a recent trip that they really loved is not fun for them. It's not fun for me to read. And a lot of people don't answer it properly because it's an annoying question. It's an annoying question on a new inquiry form where you're just trying to connect with somebody. So I've moved it to my new inquiry call.
Oh, good. I think that's brilliant, and I agree with you 1,000% about the form, that it needs to be fairly short, because worst thing in the world to me is to feel like I'm doing homework,
Yep.
and the worst thing is that they look at it and they go, "Oh my gosh, this is gonna take forever. I'm not gonna do
Hmm.
this." I mean, it's the same
Exactly. Yeah.
sort of logic as completing surveys. If the survey is too long or too complex, people just won't do it, and then you
Yep.
won't have any information. So then that creates a barrier to them even working with you because 'cause they're not gonna fill out the form. And the other detriment, and why you have to be careful about your form, is if you ask a question on the form that they could possibly answer erroneously or give you a false impression. And typically those are very open-ended questions like what is the best trip you've ever taken, and you ask them a lot of details, and they may, for the sense of brevity or I just got to get through this thing, either just shorten that question, and then maybe you get a false sense of
Hmm.
what the real answer is. So
Yeah.
I I think that's very smart to move it to the conversation rather than having it on the form.
Well, because then if you ask them about I love this idea, and I'm even gonna, like, enhance what I currently do, because I think you've brought up a really good point of just, like, if they're not giving you a lot to work with in terms of, like, "Why do you wanna go to Alaska, and why now?" Which happens often. Then
Mhm.
if you talk about a past trip, you can like you said, you can see what lights them up. You can ask them how they might change that trip or how they might do it differently if they did it again, and then you start to learn about their quirks, right? Of
Mhm.
like, "Oh, we would have stayed in a nicer hotel, or we would have stayed in each place 3 or 4 nights instead of only 2 nights." Like, you can just start tapping into, like, what
Right.
was kind of, felt like friction in the previous trips.
That's
But
a
then
great
going back to, like, the why Alaska, I really have so many clients who are just like, "It's just always a place we've wanted to go." Or, "So and so went and their photos were beautiful."
right?
And I'm always just like, "On folks, like, just dig deep and just give me something." And so,
Right.
because I'm now, like, basically expecting this kind of answer that's just, like, giving me nothing, I try to come prepared to just ask more questions and be like, "Well, are you interested to cruise Alaska or to go by land, or would you like to do both?"
Yeah. And sometimes that's the best way to get an answer from somebody is to give them 2 choices. You
Yeah.
know, you don't wanna give people too many choices. Like, I mean, have you ever been to Cheesecake Factory and seen the menu?
Awful.
It's like,
Ugh,
"No,
awful.
please, could you cut this by 50% at least? Because there's too many choices
Maybe 80.
here." 80 or 90 might be better. But to say, so, okay, so you've always had Alaska on the list. Are you planning on hiking on glaciers, or is wildlife more important to you? Or yeah, and
What
do you wanna go by
about
land? Do you wanna go by sea? And often too, Alaska is one of those destinations like so much of Europe and Asia and other parts of the world, people don't really understand what's there. They just know it's one of those things they're supposed to do, and it's on their
Yep,
bucket list, and like you said,
yep.
our friends went and the pictures were pretty and they had a great
Uh-huh,
time.
uh-huh.
Well, just because your friends had a great time doesn't mean you're gonna have a great time.
Exactly.
So, let's talk about that, because if you said to me, "So are you gonna go hiking on glaciers, or are you gonna go kayaking around the glaciers?" I'd be like, Heck no, is there a
Hard
spa
pass.
somewhere up there?"
Is there a spa on the
A glacier
glacier?
spa, I might could do that.
So I think that this just goes in line with asking the right questions, and I'm always aiming to be like one step ahead of the client. So it's like, you want to go to Alaska? Okay. I'm preparing for that call to find out, like, what are the 2 or 3 or 4 questions that I need to ask them to make sure that I'm walking away with, like, an approach on how to design this trip, like understanding how is their Alaska trip going to be different than anyone else's Alaska trip. But I think that this strategy is like, it wins on both sides because it helps me get to know what they're looking for. Because as soon as you offer, like you said, if you offer 2 options, people suddenly have a strong opinion.
Right,
If you just say, like, "Why do you wanna go to Alaska?" They don't have an opinion. But as soon as you're like, "Well, are you thinking to go, like, by land or by sea?" They're like, "Oh, we wanna cruise," or like, "Oh, we definitely wanna hike in Denali. Like, we're not looking for a boat." Like, they
right,
suddenly have very strong, and you're like, "Okay, now I know who I'm working with. Now
right,
I know who I'm talking to."
right.
I also think that the more questions you have prepared about specific to the destination in this way, you're establishing yourself as the expert. Because a lot of times I'll hear them say on the phone, like on our call, they'll be like, "Oh, I hadn't thought about that."
Mhm. And that establishes you as the expert, and I wanna just put in a little caveat here that I
Yeah.
hope everybody who's newer to the industry hears. Nothing that we just said is required for you to have been to that destination, done that cruise, been there before. You don't have to have done any of that to have this conversation. So a lot of times people get in their own way and say, "Well, I've never been to Alaska, so I couldn't possibly help people with that." And that's not true.
Hey, guess what?
And yeah,
I've never been to Alaska.
you've never been to Wimbledon either, but look how
Never
much
been to Wimbledon.
yeah.
Nope. And I've been talking about this topic a lot recently too. I just did a webinar for the Hive on specifically like how to use the time while you're
Mm,
waiting for your next inquiry to come in. Newsflash, it's all about going and gathering these questions of like, what questions do I need to ask about Alaska so that I can establish my expertise as someone who can plan Alaska, but guess what? I've never been to Alaska. What
Right,
questions do I need to learn to know to ask clients who want to go to Wimbledon? Now I know. I've never been
right.
to Wimbledon.
And that's where your partners are so important.
Mhm.
If you're doing Alaska, there's a lot of cruise is the number one way people get there. So,
Mhm.
there's some great cruise line training out there that's not just about the cruise itself or the cruise line or the cruise company or the ship. Tells you what you need to know about Alaska and land and sea and all that stuff, and same thing with working with your partners with DMCs and asking them questions and finding out what you need to know.
Well, I think when you just approach anything with a little bit of curiosity, like as just pretend that you're the consumer and try to go see what it looks like to search an Alaskan cruise.
Right.
And suddenly as because we are travel professionals and this is what we do. And even if you are brand new, it doesn't matter. You'll immediately have questions. Well, what's the difference? This one versus this one, this cruise line versus this cruise line. Well,
Right.
why do some of these depart from Seattle and some depart from Anchorage and then some depart from Vancouver? Like, why
Mhm.
are some round trip and some one way? What's the difference with all of these? And if you just lead with curiosity, 30 minutes you'll be able to kind of start gathering a few little tidbits to ask a client, like, hey, what feels like a priority to you? What feels most interesting? I cannot tell you in my early days, and by early days, I mean like a year ago. This is not 8 years ago, unfortunately. I got very excited by clients wanting to go to Alaska. And so I did the research based on what I thought the best approach to Alaska is, which
Mhm.
is a one way southbound itinerary that includes Glacier Bay, folks.
Mm.
Well, I did all of this work to present this beautiful proposal of the two itineraries with the two different ships that I thought was going to be great. And I provided a compare and contrast to like, these are the two ships, and this is what you should expect on this ship and this ship with the itinerary, all the things. And then they're like, yeah, but we definitely want to depart and do round trip Seattle because that's easier. And I was like,
Mm.
oh my gosh, I did not ask enough questions.
Yeah.
I did not ask enough questions to get to know those clients.
That's a good learning experience, right?
It was a great learning experience. Yeah.
And and thankfully you learned from that experience, so you didn't have to keep repeating it. But, I think in addition to asking questions, though, there's another component to this that sometimes people forget and we're not as good at in today's world, I think, as maybe we used to be. And it's a skill we can definitely get better at. And that's you can ask questions, but you actually got to listen to the
Listen.
answers.
Yeah.
And so many people are so busy thinking about what they're going to say next, they don't really listen to the answer. Or this research about Alaska and I've got 15 pages of notes. And so I'm going to ask you a question, but then I got to hurry up and get to the next thing because I've got so much to tell you and so much to talk about. And so you're not really listening, or you're listening, but you're not really paying attention to the body language and reading the room.
I would argue, like, kind of based on our earlier discussion, that you're not on a call with clients to share all the knowledge that you have about Alaska. You're on the call to ask them questions about Alaska and about their preference or what they're looking most forward to doing. And just simply by asking really detailed, informed questions, you are establishing your expertise.
Right.
They're
I
not
agree with you.
actually interested in your, unofficial presentation of all the things that you know. I think they're kind of hoping that you know all of that and they trust you.
Right.
And they don't need the PowerPoint, right?
Right. Yes. No. Listen, nobody needs another PowerPoint in their life.
Even like a
Even
hypothetical
Canva.
PowerPoint, but I guess I hope that people are establishing their expertise, but asking the right questions to best serve their client by asking questions and not by like we should be talking very little on discovery calls. Just
Right.
like you said, like we should be asking a question and then just listening
Mhm.
and just seeing where that goes.
Yes. And some clients are easier to pull information out of than others, but I agree with you 100% that they should be doing most of the talking, because genuinely this is about getting curious about the client and getting to know them, because if you can learn about the client and what they value and what's important to them, that's how you develop client relationships that serve you for a long period of time, more than just one trip, one and done. You're
Mm.
establishing that relationship with them, and n ev you know, everybody's favorite topic is themselves, and
Mhm.
so when you talk to them about what they're passionate about in life, what they love to do, what their hobbies are, where their favorite restaurants are, whatever, then you're learning more about them that can serve you in this trip and in future trips, but it also can serve you in how you communicate with them between trips
Mhm.
and how you the kind of material that you send them between
Mhm.
trips too.
Mhm.
So that if you're learning, you're picking up little tidbits, it helps you to know this for, marketing information for the future. Like if you said land or sea and they said, "Oh, dear God, I'd never get on a boat in my life," then you definitely don't need to be
Noted.
sending them cruise material
Noted.
about anything, right? And if they're
Yes,
all about wilderness, but they don't really like traveling internationally, and that's one of the reasons that they wanna go to Alaska, well, there's lots of great places in Canada, in the Midwest, and that they can stay without having to go across the pond to visit.
exactly. So you specifically mentioned asking them why they wanna go somewhere, why and why now,
Mhm.
and then also, like, asking them to share about a recent trip and what they really loved about it. Are there more specific questions that you have in mind that can kinda help us kinda get our brainstorming juices flowing in terms of how to ask the right questions?
Well, I love to ask people about, especially if you're talking to clients that you're just really kinda having trouble sort of getting information from, and so you wanna be able to throw them some softballs and some easy things to do, and to say, "What kinda hobbies do you each have? What kind of thing get into their passions?" Or even I love even asking people if you had $500 gift card and could go and have an amazing rest evening out, what would you do? And in
Oh,
your local area. Somebody
I
gave you
love that.
$500 and said the only thing it can be used for is an incredible evening out in your local area. What would you do? And it may be that they may say, "Oh, there's this local restaurant and I'd order the most expensive wine," and or they may say, "Ooh, $500, that's a lot of money. I'm gonna call 5 of my friends, and we're all gonna go together, and we're gonna go do this, or we're gonna go to Topgolf," or whatever. There's just all you never know what they're gonna come up with, but that gives you insight into what they value
I
because
love
that's what
that.
they know.
How would you answer that question? You have $500, Sandy. You have to spend it in your local community. What are you gonna do?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that I personally would probably go and have an amazing dinner in Uptown Charlotte and go to the theater and go to
Oh,
a
I love
play,
that.
some depending on what was on, go to a play or some sort of live or maybe the symphony or some sort of concert thing. I love live performing arts, except I do not like ballet at all. So, wouldn't be
Very
ballet.
important detail. Very
Yes,
important
exactly.
detail. The first thing that came to my mind is that I would go to the spa by myself, and I think that that is so reflective of having a baby in my life right now. And then I would maybe invite my friends to dinner, but, like, first spa, and if there's money left over, then
So
we
pay
can meet for dinner.
I love that answer, and you're right, that is very reflective of where you are in life right now.
And I think that that's why that question is so good, is because
Mhm.
when you are talking to someone about a trip, it is also really, really important to understand what is going on in your life right now.
Right.
I
Yes.
just told DMC I'm planning a trip for some repeat clients, and they had their second baby this year as well. And so when they go on this trip, the baby will be 15 months old or something like this.
Mm,
And I told the DMC, I said, these are very independent travelers. They love to go, 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 and they love to be busy. But I need to protect them from themselves. They have not asked for this, but they have a toddler and a new baby at home. We cannot send them home tired,
right.
right? Like, and so this is actually like, I'm just observing their life.
Mhm.
And this is this will be their first like adults only trip since their daughter's been born. And so I shared that with the DMC. So while we were putting together the proposal, we could actually kind of keep that in mind. But that could, if it's a brand new client that you don't know, you can ask questions about what's going on in their life. And when you say what's going on in their life, I don't know that I would have given you a very good answer. But as soon as you ask me an interesting question of like, you have $500, what are you going to do with it? You just learned a lot about me with
Right.
one simple question of like,
Yeah.
oh, it doesn't matter how eager and motivated I usually am to go on every historical guided tour in every place I visit. Right now in my life in this moment, that probably wouldn't be best for me.
Right. A spa and a nap would be
And
incredible.
and then a good meal. And
Right.
then maybe we can talk about a historical walking tour and also maybe not this time.
Right. Yeah,
Right?
and yes, exactly, and that's why it's important to not only have these conversations, and they differ with existing clients, but that's why it's important to have these conversations with existing clients too,
Yeah, for
and to
sure.
find out how things have changed because you very wisely have have helped build the trip in a way that they wouldn't think to do for themselves. And they're still going to get a lot out of wherever it is that they're going. But they're like you said, I mean, how many of us have come back from a vacation and said, "Oh my gosh, I need a vacation now." And
Always.
that's me
Yeah.
pretty much on every trip I ever take because
Yes.
no stone can be left unturned.
Exactly. Because we're very curious folks.
Right. Exactly. I need to see all the things and do all the things.
But I also love that you shared that you would love to go to the ballet, or I mean the symphony, not the ballet. Or do like go to the theater or something, because that is something that I don't always think about if a
Mhm.
client doesn't specifically mention it. And
Right.
in some destinations, there are really fabulous theater, concert, music, symphony types of opportunities. But it's not like, unless that's something that you would do at home, you're not going to necessarily go do that in a new destination. But if you know
Right.
that someone does like doing that at home, they're probably interested to do that in a different destination as well.
Yes, and to have that experience. And that you bring up a really good point because you cannot assume that just because you like or don't like something that your clients wouldn't. And I think people are really good about recognizing that about themselves. But what we're not so good always about recognizing is how narrow our own world is. Because if you really don't like the theater at all and never go to the theater. Or like I'm not a sports fan really. So like the idea of going and like, oh my gosh, there's a football stadium, a baseball stadium, and a I don't know, some other kind of sports stadium in this place and I could go and visit all those
Uh-huh.
things. I would be like, okay, I'll be at the spa. Y'all have fun with that.
Uh-huh.
But if I was going somewhere and there was a Formula One something or other there, then I'd be all about it.
You'd be into it?
I love Formula One.
Dandy, who knew?
You see, it's very eclectic, you just never know.
You just never know. We're from the spa to the theater to Formula One. Sandy Saburn, everybody.
Exactly, that's me. Combine
Well,
all of those things in one trip, and then now you have magic.
I mean, there you go. And it's so funny you're mentioning sports because I'm researching Japan and I absolutely want to see a sumo tournament. Like
Oh, I would
one
too.
100% I want to go to a sumo tournament. And they
And
only
I
happen
actually
every other month. And so they're not always going on. So now
really?
I'm like trying to like be there when one of them yeah.
I didn't know
There
that
are
about
You can go to amateur tournaments that happen periodically throughout, or you can go to a stable near Tokyo where they train. I've learned all these things because
mm,
I'm like asking questions for my own trip to try to, figure out how I can work this in. But I
right.
think somebody said recently, which is so true, and it kind of made me smile, that it's just like, stop going to like European destinations in particular and like thinking that you need to go to all the museums or planning to go to all the museums. When they were like, "Do you go to the museums in your home city?" I'm
Exactly.
like, I don't. I
I
don't."
do.
And it kind of just like was kind of like, you know what? It almost felt like permission,
Mhm.
that it was like, you don't have to go to all the museums when you go to a new city, even if they're famous and even if, whatever. And I've started saying that to clients too, of like, listen, you can go to the academia and you can go to Uffizi when you go to Florence. And if you genuinely feel like you'd be missing out if you didn't go, you can go and we'll talk about that. But you also, I almost like give them permission sometimes of like, you could have a fabulous time in Florence and not go to these museums. If
Right,
we work this into your itinerary, I want it to be because you are genuinely interested and not because you're doing something that you feel like you have to do.
right. Like it's required to do
Right.
those
Right.
things. I
Right.
agree with you, and especially in today's world when there's so many things that you can have some sort of exposure to or see. I mean, you don't have to go to the feet, so you can see David
Yeah.
online, and then you'll have the idea of it.
Uh-huh.
If you're passionate about cooking and you could go to, you know, somebody's home and learn how to cook a home cooked meal in Italy and make your own pasta, and that's probably gonna be far more memorable to you
Exactly.
than wandering around a museum. Now, if you are an art fanatic, then there is going to be no substitute for going to those places, but I think it's a good point to give yourself permission to not do those things just because somebody feels like they're must do things. I mean, listen,
Yeah.
I've been to some places like I may be the only person that will ever listen to this podcast or that I will ever meet who's actually been to the paper museum in Basel, Switzerland.
I love it.
I mean, there's probably there's probably not that many people in the whole world who've actually been to the paper museum. I thought it was really cool, but how many people are going to think, "Hey, yeah, let's go to this paper museum while we're
Uh-huh.
in Switzerland?"
Uh-huh. Yeah, and I think it's it's really interesting to I love your question because the question of how would you spend $500 is far more interesting than what are your hobbies?
Right. I agree.
And you really get a good answer out of that because then you can say, well, if you like to do those things at home, here's how we can maybe infuse that into this trip that we're currently discussing.
Right.
Or what you've described is absolutely amazing. Those types of things aren't going to be available in this destination. Knowing that, does that feel disappointing?
Right. Because you may have just made an assumption as a consumer that this is, this place and
I
it must
have
have this.
food is a very big part of my life. I love to
Mhm.
eat, I love to cook, I love to try new things. I love all things food and beverage and culinary things when I travel. And I have made a few assumptions that you can kind of just find great food wherever you travel.
Mhm.
And there are a couple destinations that that is not the case. And
Mhm.
I came home like the trip was great. We did cool things. The food was very disappointing and it did kind of put like a bit of a damper over that trip for myself because I wasn't expecting that going in. And
Mhm.
so I will tell clients now like, "Hey, we can absolutely plan this destination. We absolutely should and I love it and here's why." If you are looking for really fabulous dining, it's not going to be on this trip. That's something to kind of know. And so if you ask a question like that and you see, oh, they really love spa, they really love food, they really love theater. Cool. Do we know that that's not what we're getting on this trip? Okay, we know we're all on the same page. Okay, cool. Just as long
Right.
as we're on the same page is really all we're trying to get to, right?
Right, or if you know they really wanna go and see sumo wrestling, we gotta make sure that
The
that's
dates have
there
to align.
because you just make the assumption that, of course, that exists in Japan and it's everywhere and you can go and see it anytime.
It is only happening every other month, and every other month it's happening in different cities. And so
Wow.
even if you get the month right, you've got to get the city right.
Well, that's just almost as complicated as getting Taylor Swift tickets.
Wimbledon.
Or Wimbledon, yeah, exactly. No,
Yeah.
yeah, that's very interesting, very interesting, and I think all of these things just, like I said, go back to the just getting to know people, and when you're curious about them, they learn about you as sort of a byproduct, and it
Mhm.
just helps build that relationship and just makes it so much easier to forge a working relationship and that they feel good about working with you. And those are the clients that are gonna refer people to you like
Yes.
crazy. They're gonna come back and book with you, and they're not the kind of clients that are going to, "Well, I found this $50 cheaper online,"
Right.
kind of clients, or that are
Right.
gonna second guess everything you come up with.
So you have so far these have been such fabulous questions. Are there any other really fabulous questions you like to ask?
So I think I'm much more personally, much more of a the questions are based on the conversation. So one
Mhm.
thing leads to another
Yep.
thing, and ask more questions about that. And asking just open-ended questions, I think, is generally my go-to, but like we talked about earlier, sometimes if people are and some people just aren't accustomed to having these kinds of conversations, then it is good to just say, "Well, this or that, A or B. Would you prefer this or would you prefer that?" And
Yes.
it kinda helps loosen them up a little bit because there are some people who are a little bit concerned about answering questions wrong, even
Yeah.
though there
There's
truly
no
are
wrong
no wrong
answer. Yeah.
answers, but
And I
they
think that
feel that way.
that's where, like, doing just a tiny bit of prep before any discovery call, which is why I won't answer random phone calls, because if I
Mhm,
can't do any prep, then I can't really do any of this that I'm saying. But if I know generally what you want to talk about, I will do just a little bit of discovery kind of research and
mhm.
just see, like, what's generally possible here. So if the clients aren't responding well to open-ended questions and I do get to the point that I need to do a this or this, I need to know what is the this or this, right?
Mhm.
And
Right.
so, for example, we were with these clients doing Wimbledon. he we were kind of deciding what to do after that, and they threw out Ireland and I threw out Paris, and then somehow we landed on Scotland. And so then it's like, well, what kind of experience are we looking for in Scotland? Are we looking for like small countryside B&Bs where you are self-driving around and really going on a lot of scenic drives, or do we want a castle stay where you can really stay on property and enjoy all these fabulous activities that are right there on property and you don't actually have to leave? And then they had a very strong opinion. They wanted the castle stay. They didn't want to drive. They had no interest in being in the car all day long for multiple days. But when I asked an open-ended question, they couldn't even come up with Scotland.
Right.
And then when they came up when I finally got them to Scotland, I was like, "Well, what do you want to see and do there?" They were just like, they couldn't. And then I gave them a choice, and boom, they had very strong opinions. So
Right.
that is one kind of, I think, a good strategy that you've shared of like when clients, when they're not responding well to the open-ended, then start offering him a this or that, and suddenly they
'Cause
get
there
pretty
are a lot of
animated.
people who just they don't know what the possibilities are, really, and they just know that they're drawn to something, or in this case, they're gonna be in one part of a world and then of the world, and they're gonna wanna expand beyond that, but they don't really know what the options are beyond that and what could be done. So once you've done that homework and you give them some options, it does open up literally a new world for them.
So I think just to kind of wrap this up and to also make sure that everyone feels included in this conversation, this feels like it might be a little bit easier when clients are asking for Europe and when there are like a million options and directions that we could go. And sometimes the advisors who are quoting lots of things and never hearing back, it's not the custom, super complicated things that they're quoting. It's actually more
Mhm,
of like a sun and sand stay that they're saying, I
mhm.
sent out 15 quotes and I didn't hear back, assuming that those are sun and sand stays. Cause I don't, as an FIT person, I don't send out quotes, right?
Right.
So, in applying the strategy of asking questions to best serve our clients on a simpler trip that is more of a sun and sand approach, how do you think about asking these types of questions? Like, are you thinking, no, the questions are the exact same, Whitney? Like, don't make this so complicated. Or do you feel like there's a slightly different approach to asking the right questions and developing a rapport with clients who are looking for a more straightforward trip?
That's a really good question, and I think the process is very similar, and I think you do need to have the conversation with people because even if you're talking about a sun and sand, all-inclusive trip, you still need to match the client with the destination and with the property and with the amenities that are available on property and nearby, and so that's important, and I think even with cruise, so for people who I hear all the time, "Oh, I never charge a booking fee for cruise because, I mean, how complicated is that? I just" you pick the cabin, you pick the thing, you're done, and it's like the number one reason that people who go on a cruise are unhappy is there's a mismatch. This is according to
Yeah.
Kalia, not just Sandy, but there's a mismatch between the cruise line chosen and the client's interest. If you
Yes.
take somebody who wants theater and activities and to be able to see shows and have art and all of that, and you put them on a ship that the most entertaining thing going is gambling, they're not gonna be happy. If you take people who are accustomed to staying at higher end hotels, like maybe a Four Seasons, and you put them on a cruise that is very mass market and not very service oriented, they probably aren't going to be happy. And so there's lots of things that you need to tap into. And I think this is even more one of the reasons why you need to ask questions is because so many times people do say, "Oh, my sister and brother-in-law or my neighbors or whoever
Mhm.
went on this cruise and they loved it." Well, they're
Yes.
completely different people than
I think
you.
people don't really understand, like, someone you might know and love and spend a lot of time with in your personal life, that you can actually be drastically different travelers.
Yes. People you can are married to, you can
Yeah,
be drastically different
that
travelers.
too. I don't think that the average consumer truly understands that.
I agree with you. And so we have to be sort of the peacemakers in some sense of the word and have to figure out what's gonna serve both of them. And
Mhm.
it's complicated, and for those people who aren't cruise specialists, I think sometimes people tend to think of boats, 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 boat. Well, first of all, they're
Oh, no.
ships, not boats, and they're very different. And so, like,
Yes.
you know, one end extreme to the other, and so you've gotta help match up the right destination experience and ship experience for the clients for what they want to do. Same thing with picking the right resort for even a if like I'm a new mom and I'm exhausted and I just want to relax, you still are going to have parameters of the kind of place you're going to want to go to. If I send you as your advisor and I say, Whitney, this is a great resort, go here, and it's a 20-minute walk from your room to the spa, maybe you're
I'm
not
just
gonna
gonna
be
sleep in
happy
the
with that.
spa. I'm just gonna
Yeah,
say that.
I'll
No
just move
reason to go
in.
back to my room. I'll be
Right,
here.
right. And there's 2 restaurants on property, so now you gotta
Oh.
go find somewhere to stay, and then it becomes not a very relaxing trip. So
I'm glad you reminded me of this because I was just speaking with a mom recently who has 3 kiddos and she wants to go on this trip. And she did kind of allude that, like, her husband is a different traveler than she is. And so I asked her, I was like, what feels relaxing to you? When you
great
know that
question.
your kids are having fun in a resort, whether it's a kids club or just an activity or whatever it is, and you have a few hours to yourself, what are you going to do? What feels relaxing? And where I will go to a spa, she explicitly said, I will not go to a spa.
Mm,
To her, relax is, she described relaxation as like she knows that everything is taken care of.
mm,
The meals are taken care of, the reservations are in place, the kids are having fun, her husband's doing what he wants to do, and she just gets to just be knowing that everything is taken care of. And I was like,
right.
I can deliver on that.
Yes. And that's bliss to her. I worked with clients one time, and they I got them to do an escorted tour, and they were so happy because the number one thing they fought over was what the schedule was gonna be for the day, where they were gonna go, what they were gonna do. He wanted to do this, she wanted to do that. They were always fighting on every trip they took. When they went and they did this, they were very
There
happy
were no decisions to make.
because they didn't have to make any decisions, and obviously, a lot of thought was put into the right tour, but so it's so different from person to person and couple to couple and group to group.
How would you spend your money? How would you spend your time? What feels most relaxing? What Tell me about a trip. What would you do differently about it? Tell me about a trip. What did you love most about it? Those are your questions right there.
Yes,
And then
absolutely.
just keep pulling on the string
Right,
as they share
exactly.
information with you. You have to, like, and then listen,
Listen,
listen.
and then you can say, "Tell me more about that." And just like you said, I love that, keep pulling on the string.
Yeah. Cindy, this was so fabulous. Thank you so much for such an insightful conversation. I really enjoyed talking about this with you.
Thank you, Whitney, I enjoyed it too. And I always love chatting with you, so it was wonderful.
I know. Keep sending me more cool ideas because these are my favorites. I love them so much.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.